Welcome to The Gap, where it's our mission to bridge the gap between training and on-field performance.
I'm Brett Hart, owner of Hitman Performance.
And I'm Dan Labadia, the owner of Jack Javelin.
Hope you guys enjoy the show. Welcome back to this episode of The Gap. Here we have a very special guest, one of my old-time friends and baseball teammates, Springfield baseball legend, Cadin Maynard. He's a strength coach for the Toronto Blue Jays complex division, and we're happy to have him on the show. Cadin?
Appreciate you guys for having me. Really excited to be here.
Dude, we're stoked to have you here. And just to give the audience a little bit of background, talk a little bit about the Springfield legend baseball too, because I think you still have the hits record, if I'm not mistaken.
I mean, I appreciate that, I appreciate that shout out.
I'm an alum. We got to get Springfield on the map. We got a lot of Springfield guys out there in the coaching world. So
yeah, and that record will be broken soon enough. But I do appreciate the recognition. I guess my origin story started in a similar place where I'm sure a lot of strength coaches. I was that guy that loved sports. I was talented enough to kind of get by at the time in high school, but I lacked some of the physical qualities that you need to really separate yourself as you try to play the next level. Realized it was probably a good time to start training. Fell in love with it. Actually went into Springfield as a sport man major. Wanted to be in like front office, and then quickly realized that, with this developed passion with training, that I was going to switch to exercise science. Did that. Obviously, it's a well-established program at Springfield. Had the opportunity to intern in the varsity weight room a lot. Learned under a lot of great coaches that are in, pretty awesome spots today. Hunter Reeser, I know he was our strength coach. I look at him for a lot of inspiration. Mikey Blazowski's with the Colts. I mean, there's a lot of names and a lot of people I got to learn under. From there, my first internship out of Springfield, I got to go to a local facility, Powerhouse Training, where 90% of the clientele was baseball players, high school baseball players, through an AAU team that was stationed out of there. So I kind of got some experience working with, that sector. And obviously a lot of exposure with baseball guys. Later got hired there in my first year of grad school, which is pretty cool. Kind of taught me, how to create, establish, maintain a clientele, what the private sector day looks like. And I would say my internship experience kind of gave me experience in all of them, which I appreciated: collegiate and professional, private sector. I had the opportunity to become a graduate assistant at Springfield, which was definitely a big opportunity for me. I was in charge of the women's soccer team, women's basketball, track and field, specifically the sprinters and jumpers, and then baseball. So, that variety was awesome for me in terms of growth and exposure. Had to do a 400-hour internship in the summer after my first year, going into my second year. And I, had a connection with the Blue Jays where I got an opportunity to come down here and shadow for a few weeks. Reached out, we made it happen. So I had the opportunity to, intern down here with the single A affiliate. So the complex league rookie ball team is in Dunedin. That's the team I worked with this year. And then there's also the single A, low A affiliate about 10, 15 minutes down the road. Had the opportunity to intern with them. And then, kind of worked out where, I needed a job. They had a position, and, here I am. So yeah, I've been really lucky with the experiences that I've had to this point. And, it's definitely been a variety of learning and exposure. So, I'm happy where I'm at right now. So
Sweet. We love to see the baseball guy working with the track and field athletes too.
I tell you what, and I'll give Coach Griff Weiler a shout out. Like we each worked with the track and field team because it's a giant team. I love track and field. I didn't know I'd love it so much. My old roommate in college was a sprinter and a jumper. Soon I kind of went to some of the meets, and tell you what, they're fun to work with. I think the entire sport is awesome. I love fast people, so it's fun working with people that are that explosive.
Yeah, and that's a big thing too, is that I love about track and field, because as a track and field coach, a lot of times track and field coaches wear that hat of being the strength coach and the event coach, or the sport coach, as some people call it. And, I think that general strength and conditioning and general normal sport coaches can take a lot from that as well, to be more intertwined, because at the end of the day, the track and field coach's job is to get the athlete to produce as much force as possible. And obviously technique is a component of that, but it's always how far can you throw, how fast can you run, how far or how high can you jump. And you're essentially trying to just have the athlete on a program that's going to get them to accomplish that as much as possible. So in a sense, training is the sport in track and field. And so that's a really cool thing that we see with a lot of carryover there that other sports can really benefit from. So, going back to your past 2 to 3 years, like, with your experience coaching at the private sector facility and then a little bit with the track and field athletes and then now with the Blue Jays, how's your training system evolved a little bit over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I'd say, the biggest part is just in what I value. I would say 2 to 3 years ago, obviously still very introductory. And I felt like I was creating protocols and even training myself just to kind of check a box, right? Does this session have an upper body pull in it? Does it have a lower body push in my training core? I feel like I was going through my sessions just to, check a box. Did I create and establish a, thorough and well-balanced session? And I think there's a ton of value in that. And I still, pull pieces from that today. But I do think that, with working with organisms as complex as humans, that there needs to be more thought, more insight, more conversation, and ultimately a little more complexity, in creating and establishing protocols. So I think just the insight and the detail is a big part. Like the conversations that I would have with Griff at school and work with track, where we just sit down and talk programming and brainstorm what the next cycle is going to look like. Those are some of the more insightful, detailed, eye-opening conversations I had. And I know you guys are familiar with Coach Saz as well. Got to give
Coach, shout out, Coach. Shout out Velo. Shout out Welty. Shout out all those guys in Minnesota.
like seriously, like Saz opened my eyes to a lot of things. And I think through those conversations and exposure, I learned that, like being curious and being creative is a good thing. And I think I lacked a lot of that curiosity at the beginning. And I think ultimately that curiosity led to like a lot more expression. And I think that's what training needs to be. So in terms of like big changes, instead of just like kind of going through and creating a well-balanced workout, it's now more focused. Like training is far more than just physical, right? What can I do to keep my athletes super engaged all the time? Because I know that engagement is going to drive more intent. That intent is going to be extremely crucial in driving adaptation, which is our ultimate goal of our program. So I would just say that, the structure of my training now and the way I lay it out is it's far more detailed in terms of, am I getting the most bang for my buck here? How can I, create some engagement here? Because any strength coach, I think, can get another individual strong. I think it's one of the easier things to do in our field. But what can I do to, help create the best movers, the best athletes, the guys that make the best, quickest decisions and adapt, the best. And, that's where, that introduction to like variety and, I term it movability. You can term whatever you want, but I think just putting guys in positions where they're forced to make decisions, make them quickly and live with them. Maybe it's the wrong one, you'll learn from it. How can you adapt? How can you adjust from that? I think, exposure to that within a program is super important. And I think in terms of structure, like, yes, there has to be time for expression. Like I think movability is all about expression. How can I create an environment for the individual to be able to express themselves maximally and not have to worry about it? But we are the strength coach. We do have to make the environment fairly controlled. And I think you do that, in a variety of ways. Constraints are a big one. So depending on what you're doing, like you can apply certain constraints to the exercise that force them to make, difficult and different decisions throughout. That's going to alter the outcome of the drill and the decisions they make.
Give us an example of a constraint that you use.
So, yeah, I try to use a bunch, but I like to include cognition a lot. So just one I've done in the past, like like a box with 4 cones. The guy starts in the middle. Lower left is cone 1, upper left is cone 2, and then 3, 4, etc. Right? Change direction drill. I'm giving them a number. They have to process that number. So if I say 41, they got to go to cone 4, touch, and then burst out through cone 1, maybe catch a ball or something, right? How can I incorporate different aspects of cognition to force them to make decisions? I'll do a lot of things where I can apply numerous stimuli. Like, is it do I say a color? Do I say a number? Do I say, whatever it may be? And based on, the one that they have to, accept and then decide will alter if, do they act or do they not? So like talk a lot about OODA loop. I'm just trying to put my guys in a lot of decisions where they're forced to, observe, orient themselves with what we're doing, and then decide and act as quickly as possible. So constraints come in a lot of ways, but I like to, combine their ability to move physically through space and their ability to process, what's going on cognitively. So, because that's sport at the end of the day. The guys that separate themselves, like fast and game fast, and it's all about making decisions. So
Dan Fichter, as you were talking, you just reminded me of Dan Fichter's quote. It's like, it's really easy to make someone strong, but it's really hard to make someone fast. And it's really, really hard to make someone be fast without having to think about it. So that's where, like, the Troy Polamalu training was like, I don't have to think about being fast. I can just be out there and just, that's who I am. I'm fast. I'm an athlete. Like, there's no being it. There's no trying to be it. And I think a lot of strength coaches, as I was going to ask you about the variation in the structure versus abstract, which you touched upon, is strength coaches love everything being controlled. Like, we love checks, boxes. We know exactly what things are. And I think that's why, as you're talking, you're track and field, and it made me think about it. I think the reason why coaches love training track and field is because there's immediate output, and if it gives you feedback right away. It's like, if you PR'd your jump, you knew your training was right. If they didn't PR the jump, there's something to fix. And there's always that give and take. Baseball, on the other hand, there's so many different variables in play that at the end of the day, you are kind of guessing if it's going to work. Like, you're trying to make them feel better, and it's a lot of subjective feelings and emotions that get brought into it. For like pitchers are the biggest example I think I can make of it, is if the wind's off a little bit, they're going to feel bad or something like that. So how do you go about, as like, the structure versus abstract, but let's go more into like the individual person, and like, how do you go about communicating that? If a person had a question as you're doing a drill, like, we know as strength coaches what you're saying, but how would you go about telling them, like, if they might feel these drills are a little stupid or maybe a little goofy, like, how would you go about explaining that to them?
yeah, I mean, you definitely have to be able to speak player, just like you have to be able to speak coach when you're talking to a sport coach, and just doing what you can to make it digestible. So like you said, baseball is super abstract. There's a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of quick decision making. So for some of the guys, like, honestly, I've seen a lot of positive feedback in terms, like, they really enjoy what we're doing, and I think part of that is it's new. But for guys that have questions, you explain, like, you're the best that you are when you're acting subconsciously, right? When you're going out there and just being. If you're going through the game and you're consciously thinking about, I need to get in this position, or I need to fire here, probably going to struggle, especially in a sport like baseball. I know, Brett.
That was me. Yeah, that was me to a T. To an absolute T.
So, like, what can I do? And you explain this to them to force you to think and act quickly, but for it to be natural, organic. And that's what I want. I don't want them, overthinking everything we're doing. I want you to just to process and act. And I think you made a good point in terms of, strength coaches want structure. And I think, I was definitely there for sure. Whereas, like, I'm in control of the session. I want it to be known that I'm in control of the session. And when in reality, our job as coaches, I'm sure there's a time for that, where there has to be kind of that overlook, but we need to be able to take a step back and allow our athletes to be athletes. And that is a time for me where I create the environment, I create the constraints, I'm forcing the athlete to act organically, naturally, and I can observe. And it kind of brings on that conversation for me that's efficiency versus effectiveness. Like, I want my athletes to move as efficiently as possible. So what is comfortable to you? Go out and move in that manner. There's probably some pieces in there that we can alter to help improve your movement's effectiveness. But how can we do that without altering the efficiency? Because if I'm not in the business of telling someone or teaching someone how to move, right? You're a human being that has gotten to this point. You know how to move in your own specific manner. I don't believe in one size fits all. I think everyone moves in their own way, and there's various factors that feed into that. But if I can create this environment and take a step back and then observe, like, maybe I can make a change here that's going to improve the effectiveness of that individual's movability. But if it's going to pull away from their efficiency and the way that they feel is comfortable, it then becomes a conversation like, is this ideal? Is this optimal for that individual?
Could I ask you a question?
Yeah.
In what regard do you coach, like, the arm path and stuff like that? Because I know that you're not necessarily like a pitching coach or anything, but at what point are you looking at the athlete's pec minor, lat, whether they are, and then like does the fact if they're like a pronator in the release like affect how you train them in the weight room at all?
So we're not as, or I'd say in my position, I'm not as hands-on with the actual skill of throwing with,
Hmm.
with our pitchers or with our position guys. Like we have coaches, we have experts for that. We, I definitely take into account how that individual moves down the hill. What does their arm action look like in the weight room? Because that can give us a lot of insight on, nagging injuries or areas of compensation and things we really need to target. So, I mean, as a strength coach, yes, we need to spend a lot of time in this, in the weight room and developing them through there, spending time out while they, sprint, et cetera. But we also need to go out, watch them play the sport, watch them do their skill, and then take pieces from that skill as insight to this could be a reason for these things happening. So to answer your question, I don't play a large role in their actual arm path and in the way that they go about moving down the hill. But I try to take bits and pieces of that sequencing. And if I can help improve that on my end, that'll help transfer over to the mound, then, I'm putting them in a good spot as they, go to train that skill with their position or pitching coach.
Yeah. How many times a week are you having them do mobility work? Because, I feel like when I first came on to being, we want to call it an online coach, a lot of what I was doing as a javelin coach was kind of looking at baseball athletes and being like, if baseball took more of the javelin side of things, I feel like some of those pitchers would have been a lot better off in terms of just building a little bit more muscle mass and being a little bit more tenacious in the weight room, but still doing a lot of the mobility stuff that us javelin throwers do. So right now, what's the balance, like, especially with your pitchers who are throwing at max velocity? What's the split between lifting and mobility in a current week?
Yeah, so honestly, a lot of it depends on the person. So I'd say the structure of their weeks for pitchers is fairly consistent, especially like your guys that are starting. Their volume and intensity the day after their start is going to be higher than the day before their start, right? So their weeks are structured. And mobility is incorporated daily. So, within their lifts, which, our guys do normally, 2 to 3 times a week, there's mobility within. Each guy has, prep that they conduct. And one thing that I appreciate about, their prep is that it's very individualized to the person in terms of what makes you feel prepared. What do you enjoy? Like if you were to walk into our weight room during prep time, like you'd see a variety of mobility going on just because guys enjoy different things and respond to different things and feel like they need different things to be prepared. And then there's sessions that are designed for mobility. Like they're not going to lift every day. Those days they'll come in and they'll do some level of, mobility, stability, motor control type stuff where, we're really getting, hands-on touch points, in that bucket, in that area, just to keep them feeling good throughout the week. So it's some do more than others based on what do they, individually prioritize, but every single pitcher is getting plenty of touch points, via mobility every week, which, is obviously very important, as as a javelin thrower.
Yeah. And going into like the hanging and stuff, because I know you post a lot about the hanging. Brett posts a lot about the hanging. I've done a lot of dead hangs in my career as well too. But one thing that I see is specifically as an athlete that was really tight to begin with. I would say, are you familiar with the term pliability?
Yes.
Okay, so like, that's a big thing that I talk about with my throwers is like you could be mobile, but you also have to be pliable, right? Like you have to have the actual muscle fibers in your muscles need to be nice and malleable in order to actually handle some of those training modalities that we do, right? So, because I'm a big believer in like post throwing hypertrophy, right? I think it's super important. That being said, if you're already really tight and you don't have pliable forearms and biceps and you don't have really good mobility, then a lot of times if you go out and throw hard and then finish with some hypertrophy, that might be counterintuitive, right? So, what are some ways that you guys target the pliability and the mobility of the forearms? And is that something that you act as a prerequisite before you introduce some of that post throwing, hanging, and hypertrophy?
I think that's a great point. Because I do think that, your standard, you know, isolated banded and cable ER and IR is probably not enough to withstand the stresses that come with high velocity throwing. So I do think that, arm care needs to also include variety and be abstract and expose you to a lot of different things. And I agree, like along with, obviously you have to be mobile to access certain positions. You also need to be pliable to withstand them. And I'd say our arm care is included within those like stability and motor control buckets. But guys also come in and have their own routine. So a lot of our guys like doing, hypertrophy stuff afterwards. In terms of, loosening their forearms before or after, we do have you guys heard of the Flex Pro grip?
I think so. Yeah. Is that
It,
like
it's
the?
not it's not a mobility unit at all. Like we're not, trying to loosen up their forearms, but I do think like isolated targeted forearm work is going to be really important. And we try to dose that afterwards. So it's not something that's, weekly or even daily, but after a high throwing day, we might have them come in and do that. And it provides a little insight on, what's happening locally. And but I do think that yes, there has to be certain steps when introducing a stimulus as potent as hanging. And I think there's so much variety within hanging, and there's a lot of progression, if you want to call it that there's plenty to offer. So I love hanging for a variety of reasons. One, it's innate to humans, and I think that any activity that is specialized, or we're one of the only handful of individuals on earth that can do it, probably something that we should take time to do, right? And then I think it does a great job at expanding some areas that are very responsible for upward rotation of scap, et cetera, grip strength. There's a million ways, but the reason I love hanging is that it you need stress to prepare for stress, and I think you kind of touched on that, and I think it does that in a variety of ways. But yeah, the general mobility work they do is designed to obviously help the forearm. Because I do like when you look at it, I think the forearm goes pretty neglected, and I think that's kind of what you were touching on. That's the reason that we've kind of dove into some different arm care, variations and piece of technology. But you have to think about how important that is when you go about throwing and gripping a baseball and doing it at high intensity. So I think it's a great point, and I think that's something that a year and a half, 2 years ago, I probably was missing, right? Like, okay, I'm preparing, the shoulder and the elbow and all the surrounding muscle groups that help support throwing and the sequencing of it, but I'm missing out on, another important area, and that's the forearm.
Yeah, I mean, Ben Baguette, I think, was the first person that I saw really big on the hangs, saying never seen a monkey with a hurt arm. I remember that being like one of the first introductions to it. I think it was my fall semester of senior year, which was actually pretty funny that I saw him. That's also what got me into the javelin stuff, and actually what got me into Dan. So that's pretty funny. But, hey, pause.
Javelin athletes are impressive. I don't think I've seen many. I obviously at school I saw some, but you see the positions that some pitchers can access based on one, how mobile they are, how well efficient are they getting down the hill, genuinely how do they move. But javelin athletes it's impressive the position that their bodies get into, and the output that they have to be able to express to be good at their sport. And I think you kind of touched on like the muscle mass and the tenacity in the weight room, and how that can really feed into your throwing and your ability to throw. And I think that's an awesome point. I think it connects it correlates pretty strongly with pitchers and in our game.
What I've seen with baseball and javelin, like the difference is that you can be a phenomenal pitcher but not a great athlete, but it's really hard to be a great javelin thrower and not also be a great athlete.
Baseball is just pitching itself, and baseball in general is so revolved around skill. Like pitching is a skill, right? And being able to be a good javelin thrower, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't have much experience with it, but the guys that throw the javelin the farthest are the best ones.
Yes.
So it's all focused and surrounded by output.
No accuracy. As long you got a little wide, you got a wide range to hit.
As long as it goes straight somewhere, like you'll be all right.
Brett, I'm sure you've seen there's plenty of guys with live arms that throw gas that can't can't throw strikes. They can't
Yeah, 105 to the backstop. Like,
correct, and it's just
yeah.
not effective in a position in a game that's so heavily reliant on your ability to acquire skill and express skill. Um, that's it. It's not just reliant on how much output are expressing. Does it help? Absolutely, but once again, what we do in the weight room and outside the weight room, on the field to get these guys faster, stronger, bigger, et cetera, is to support what they're doing on the field. And we can do all of that well, and these guys could be unbelievable athletes, but if they're not good within that skill, they're going to struggle, because that's always what it comes down to. It's always the top of the pyramid.
Yeah, and what you were talking about too, with like you're not just training fast, but you got to be game fast. That's a big difference between a pitcher being stationary on the mound versus a javelin thrower who's running into the throw. And sometimes the approach is over 30 meters long. And, that's what we talk about with like the best javelin throwers would practice that really, really relaxed style of back end speed where they're just working on accelerating, but trying to keep their face as relaxed as possible. So that way, when you're running with the javelin in your hand and then you draw back and now you're running sideways and then you throw, you have to stay completely relaxed the whole time. You shouldn't be thinking and straining and trying to focus on being fast down the runway. You should just train to be so fast in training that when you go to throw, your 75% effort down the runway is still relatively very fast, but it's also extremely smooth and relaxed.
Absolutely. The fastest guys in the world, it's not necessarily about how quickly you can track, but how quickly can you relax. And the fast guys in the world do that the best. And that's why you talk to some people, some coaches, it's, your 80% feel at top speed is going to be your fastest self, because once again, you are relaxed. And the moment you tense up is the moment that, things are going to go wrong. So I think that's an awesome point. And I think that's, anything, any game, any skill, any movement.
So going into that, what you just said, the relax and to contract, being able to just float and then slam on the brakes, that's very similar to what I'm hearing about the drop catch, like the drop catch method, anything where you are letting go, like the bench press, letting go of the bar, letting it fall and gravity take it, and then you have to rebound and completely stop it. And then altitude drops, like depth drops, are pretty much the same thing. Not necessarily a drop catch, but you are dropping your body and then having to catch yourself in that athletic position. There's a whole different variety of ways you can do it. How do you go about actually making it beneficial for your athletes and making sure you're staying away from the eyewash side of Instagram, where people kind of do the drop catch stuff, but they don't really understand the why. They just know it looks cool, so they put it in the first 3 seconds of the reel and then do the regular bro split anyways? Like, how do you go about doing it so it's actually beneficial and people get good results from it?
I love, I guess, reflexive eccentrics. And I know Fred Duncan just recently made a post about, technically it's not a reflexive eccentric because, depending on what you're working, it might not be including spinal nerves and things of that nature. But these rapid eccentrics where we're dropping and catching, or really unloading and catching, I think are phenomenal for a handful of reasons. But to begin with, you have to be able to withstand that. And I think you need to be in a position where, if you take someone that's fairly untrained, low training age, hasn't been exposed to a lot, and we ask them to do very high stress, high force drop catches, maybe putting that individual at risk. So I think it's going to be the most beneficial for people with, a solid training background, a strong foundation, exposure to years of training and variety within that training. But I love drop catches and things of that nature for a variety of reasons. One, sport isn't slow. We're never going through sport and putting on the brakes slowly. And think about the neuromuscular coordination that it takes to drop something, catch it, and redirect it as fast as you can, right? At the same time, you're now being exposed to, much higher peak braking forces, which when you get down the mound, or, when you go to throw a javelin, or when you jump up to catch a rebound and fall, you're getting exposed to, high rates of braking force. And Fred Duncan always says, I referred to him, a few minutes ago, but he's been a big influence on mine as well. But the faster our eccentric is going to yield a faster concentric. So when we, drop and catch something, or we really unload and into a concentric, like that transition to concentric action is going to naturally be quicker. And so I think that bridge to sport, that gap,
Hey,
There it is. Look at that.
that gap from weight room to the field is expressed within, rapid eccentric. So, higher peak braking forces, greater CNS demand because neuromuscular coordination, and kind of like you get that. It's obviously a rapid eccentric, but there's kind of that transition that's isometric before concentric action. So you kind of get exposed to, the entire sequence in one, but it's quicker. You know what I mean? It's so yeah, I love reflexive eccentrics. I don't think that's something that I've been exposed to enough personally in my training or prescribed enough, because it's something that, once again, Coach Saz, I kind of got introduced to it by Coach Saz. That was my first exposure to it. But when you break it down and you have athletes that are strong enough, what can we do to make those slow force athletes respond better to situations on the field where, high velocity, high RFD is necessary.
So the only rebuttal I've seen about this is, yeah, this is all great and everything, but why don't you just Olympic lift?
I guess I'll say, and
I don't either. I don't Olympic lift either, but
I know you like Olympic lifts, right, Dan?
yeah, that's how I hurt my elbow the most recent time. Well, not because of that, so this is
made
not
it drop
this
the
is
program
not gonna
about it. Man, I hurt my elbow though.
This is not gonna help my case again for them. But I had Tommy John 6 years ago, and every year since then I competed in at least 2 or 3 competitions a year since my surgery. Some of them being in college, some of them being out of college. But the last couple of years, I had that ramp up really quick during the season and then a very heavy drop off to focus on coaching in real life now that I'm an adult, and then ramp back up really fast in the spring. So anyway, this spring, this is my 3rd year doing the off season, really quick spike. And I was cleaning and I felt a pop, and then I got an MRI and x-ray and it showed that I had 3 bone spurs. So in my defense, those bone spurs were there before the cleaning accident. The cleaning accident just exposed the fact that I just popped one completely off or whatever. I don't know what happened, but it hurt really bad.
Yeah, I'm not against Olympic lifting. I mean, I've done it in the past. I'm not married to any one exercise, and I don't think individuals that, enjoy or prioritize Olympic lifting is wrong. And I think Olympic lifting is so complex, the sequencing required, and it is reflexive in nature. And, as you go into a catch, I think it's super beneficial for a lot of reasons. I don't do it personally, or I don't program it because I don't have enough exposure myself with it. The environment I'm in right now, we don't do it. And I think that there is ways to, isolate that nature of rapid eccentrics in a different manner. But if you like Olympic lifting, I think that's phenomenal. I think there's a ton of benefits. I've just recently started doing it in my training, trying to get back into hang cleaning. I used to do it a little, was never really good at it, trying it again. And I think there's a lot of value in that. And, we just spoke about how my structure and my viewpoint on training in the past 2 or 3 years has changed. Maybe in another 2, 3 years, I am Olympic lifting, right? So, okay, I don't think anything is inherently good or bad in this field, as long as you can justify why you're doing it and you see results. So, for those that Olympic lift for that reason, absolutely, if you can justify it.
Yeah, I will say that the big argument I have for it is not only does it help your power, and we use it as a CNS primer a lot of times during the season, right? People will say if you have a game, yeah. So if you have a competition every 2 weeks, so you will get that, that light hang clean session or hang snatch session the day before the meet to kind of spike the central nervous system, feel good going into the competition the next day. But a big argument I had for it too was just for me coming back from my Tommy John surgery. I went from a 265 clean before Tommy John to then up to 328 after Tommy John. So I got exponentially better at cleaning after my surgery. And what I noticed was when I graduated college but continued to throw after, what happened was I stopped cleaning because the facility that I was working at didn't have like the Olympic lifting setup. But what happened was I lost that mobility in my forearm and in that catch position, in that front squat position. And then when I lost that mobility to be able to catch that in that position, it directly translated to me not having as healthy of an arm. And so for me, like when I got back into like realizing that, and I got back into front squatting, doing light hang clean, so on and so forth, even doing a back bridge for me was painful because of the limited wrist mobility. Once I started incorporating, all right, front rack isos and back bridges and then hang cleans again, my elbow felt exponentially better. And so for me, that was like a sign that, okay, not only does this help our power and the fast twitch aspect of training that you guys are talking about, but it also, if my elbow is bothering me, that front squat position or even that front rack position, me being able to do that is a good sign that my forearm flexibility and my wrist flexibility is pretty dialed in right now. And then that correlates to, okay, now my forearm is pliable and mobile, like we were talking about earlier. And that translates for me to have a healthier elbow. So that was kind of like for me what I put the pieces together of like, all right, that ability of being able to hold that front rack position is beneficial for the health of my elbow.
And I feel like that kind of,
Yeah.
reiterates what we were talking about earlier. Like when you talk about creating protocol systems, programs for, athletes, individuals, like it has to be more complex than just like black and white and just checking boxes. Like you just isolated that, holding a front squat position and the benefit you get from that alongside, all the clear benefits you get from front squatting in general, was beneficial for you in the way you felt. You know what I mean? So everyone's going to respond differently. If we can take a step back and break down what is most optimal for each individual based on their demand, based on what they need, and based on how they feel, like even a detail that minute can be beneficial in their program. And I think that, kind of touches on what we were touching on earlier. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's what for me, like, because I like I said, the most recent time, like with my bone spurs thing, like that was starting to pop up this year, and the power clean is what exposed that for me to be like, okay, now this is more of an underlying issue. I should get this checked out. And I saw Dr. Heenan on it, who is typically, he's known for his treatment of baseball players, and his facility primarily treats baseball players and trains them. And he was just talking to me about like how, for me to do it because it's fun, enjoyable, I like it, that's fine. But like for him, if he's got a pitcher that signs a multi-million dollar contract and like their arm is why they are getting paid, there are other ways to get that wrist mobility and get that front rack position without necessarily doing the full catch, right? And he even argued that, doing the same movement but doing it in a snatch would almost be even more beneficial because you still get the triple extension and the CNS adaptation there, but then you're also able to build the power, but you're not catching it in that deep catch position that's putting a ton of pressure there. And he talks about like how even going away from the Zercher squat is helpful for overhead athletes as well, because you're just overloading that bicep tendon to the max. And so, I mean, like you said, how your philosophy is kind of changing and stuff like that. Like I know going forward for me, I'm definitely going to be more aware of it given the history of my elbow that I've had, like almost arguing that, all right, let's just get to a point where we don't lack that mobility in that position to the point where we lose it in the first place.
Right. Yeah. And I think, that's the beautiful nature of our profession is that, the way you feel right now about certain things, you may not feel in, some time about them. And then you'll come back around to the things you're doing before, and then it'll change again. And there is no right and wrong answer. And it makes it fun in establishing a, philosophy, you know what I mean? Or a structure or a system that you live by. Yeah, but all great thoughts, all great thoughts. And I guess it presents the question, like if you have a guy come in that's training with you, right? And he's a baseball guy and you understand the risks of cleaning, but this person's been cleaning for years and he's very passionate about doing it. Like there's probably a capacity in which you can include that for that individual, right? And I think that autonomy piece is a big part of, the variety that you want to include with athletes, like allowing them to have somewhat of a say in exercise selection, probably pretty beneficial. And if someone's super passionate about, hey man, I've cleaned for the last 5 years, it makes me feel good. I understand the risks that you're presenting to me, but it's something that I enjoy. Like there's probably capacity in which you can do it. Absolutely. And I think it comes with a lot of different exercises and a lot of conversations.
Yeah, I mean the clean just gets thrown around a ton. Or like Olympic lifts variations in general get thrown around a lot, just because it's so polarizing as a strength and conditioning community. You have the community that's live or die by them, and you have the community that, yeah, it's just like there's the two ends. There's just like trap bar jump party and Olympic lift party, and there's that middle ground is where you kind of get washed out. Like similar to you, I've tried cleans. It was actually Dr. Heenan that got me off of them in high school because he made that one post being like, I don't clean my baseball guys. The risk of wrist injury like doesn't really provide any benefit because like if you have a sprained wrist, you're gonna be out for quite a bit. It's like I was a catcher, you were a catcher, but like if you sprain either wrist, you're pretty much useless behind the dish because like if you sprain your throwing hand, you're not gonna be able to throw. You sprain your left hand, you can't catch the ball. So there's nothing like you're just gonna be a traffic cone back there. You might as well just put a garbage can back there and hope the pitcher hits it.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain conversations that, provide a risk versus reward conversation, and it's which side are you going to fall on based on the exercise, the demand, et cetera. And I think hang clean is one of those.
Yeah, I think Dan Fichter always talks about. I always reference him just because I learned so much from him in his podcast. Is like if you don't like something, you have to almost know that thing more than the stuff that you do like. So if you like hate Olympic lifting, if you're one of those guys that is just not for it, you better know why you don't like it. Like his reference is aerobic training because he hated doing cardio. So like one of his mentors handed him a book and he's like, you need to learn about cardio training if you're just going to say you don't like it. So I think it's with the Olympic lifting too. I think a lot of people just put the blanket statements. I, for one, was this because I was lazy and just didn't want to learn it. I didn't like it. So they're hard to teach. We're not going to do it. And then you see Angus Bradley, Will Rattel break it down in a 90-second reel. Being like, I guess it's really not that hard to teach. Rattel is a different beast. All right, you can't compare yourself to him by any capacity. But I think it's important for coaches to understand that if you don't like something, to have a really good understanding as to why you don't like it. And then the same goes for why you do like stuff, not just because it's fun. Like for an athlete to have that reason, sure, that's fine. Like it's whatever. Like if they enjoy it and they like it, they can do it. It's not that big a deal. But for a strength coach to have that thought process, that's where I get a little bit concerned as to the safety and regulations as to what's going on inside that weight room.
Yeah, if you're passionate about, like I'm never hang cleaning or Olympic lifting with my guys, well, you don't make the assumption or the argument that it's inherently bad because Noah Lyles does it and he's the fastest man on the planet. So once again, there's pros and cons to everything you're doing based on the individual and the demand. And I don't think being on either end of that spectrum where it's like you have to do this with everyone or you should avoid it at all costs is beneficial because once again, I don't think anything is inherently one size fits all 100% to zero. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, I will argue too, back to what we were talking about with like, because obviously javelin throwers clean a ton and our arm is the most important piece of our body as well, you could argue. Yeah, and I think too, going back to the tenacity piece, it's like I don't think there's another lift that's as mentally challenging as the power clean because you're basically grabbing it in a deadlift and then you have to bring it up and then get underneath it and then force your way to stand up, and it's like that's where you're moving now heavyweight fast and you're just throwing it in the air and getting your body underneath and catching it, because a lot of kids that might not be as accustomed to the weight room, like that would mentally break them, and being able to overcome that mental piece, I think is big.
Ton of value in that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that goes back to my thing of saying that you can be a great baseball player but not be a great athlete. And so that's where it gets, because baseball is just a team of individuals, and this is where it's going to lead into the question is to how to like go about this. But baseball is a team of individuals. You have a ton of different personalities and you have 9 positions on the field, and every single one of them could train a completely different way and be great at their position. Like javelin's it's a sport with a team, but it's very individualized as one person's throwing and it's all on them, right? It's their attempt, it's their try.
You got teammates competing against each other, and
Yeah,
you're playing against your team.
Yeah, you're literally going head to head with teammates.
Yeah,
like baseball sometimes too. That the clubhouse gets a little rowdy sometimes, but yeah, but baseball, you have a bunch of different individuals all coming together for one outcome is to win. That's essentially what it is. But then you also have to think at complex or low A, they're not trying to stay there either. Their goal is to move up and get better. So it's a very selfish approach. It's a team sport, but there's a lot of selfish individualism within this. So as a strength coach, how do you even go about approaching that, training as a large group, but understanding that there's all different personalities and all of them really kind of want to get the hell out of there as fast as they can?
Yeah, that's where I know I've touched on this in some of the things I posted, but that's where engagement is a massive piece. Like what can I do to create an environment that's very engaging for everyone so they want to be there? I don't want their weekly training throughout a long, rigorous season to feel like a chore, like it's extra stress. You know what I mean? I want them to genuinely, go in there and enjoy the weight room, right? What can I do to promote that? And that's where relationships come into play. And that's, there's nothing more important, in my opinion, when working in a business where we're serving people ultimately. Like I have guys that come from all backgrounds. We have college guys from different areas of the country. We have guys, from the Dominican. We have guys from Venezuela and Cuba. All these guys are different backgrounds, training backgrounds come to me. And it's my job to, yes, this is our foundation, this is our structure, but what can I do to individualize what we're doing to help meet your needs? And so I think that's where autonomy plays a big role. You have guys that, come in and this is, hey, coach, this is what's worked for me when I was in college. I'm pretty passionate about doing this in this capacity. Is there a way we can make that work? Absolutely. Let's talk about it. Let's make it work. If that's going to help you, one, be more engaged in here to get the most out of our session, get the most bang for your buck, help you play better, then it's absolutely worth including, right? Or you have others that come in and maybe haven't been exposed to the weight room. Hey, coach, I'm not well equipped in, the world of strength conditioning, the world of training, like steer me in the right direction. And that's where, that individualization and that approach to that individual is different. But to answer your question, you have guys coming in, playing as a team, we each have, personal goals moving up. That's definitely, it's definitely an aspect of the game, especially in the minor league system. But by creating an engaging environment via relationships, player to player, player to coach, you're now creating, like you said, the goal to win, but a winning environment in there. And now these guys are pushing not just themselves to get better with the goal of moving up, but like pushing each other in there, man. That's when, you see a team. And that's one thing I think we did a really good job of this year. Like we're at the lowest affiliate, and, we ended up winning the championship. And the big reason for that is because they were all friends. They were a team. And I'm sure as you, spread across different orgs, at different levels, it might not feel like that because, it is fairly individualized as you try to move systems. Like those guys push themselves with intent, and then they push their teammates. And we got the most out of training. We saw big results, and we got the most out of, obviously the games because, we won the championship. So for me, man, to answer your question, one, it always starts relationships. That's first, always. You need relationships for trust. Need to communicate to build trust, and the trust relationships will lead to, ultimately more intent and engagement in the weight room, which is going to open up, so much for, just each individual in creating, a strong presence. Because I'm sure you guys have been in weight rooms where it just felt like a chore and like felt like a task. To me, it's the worst. Like you go in there, it's boring. Like no one wants to be in there. And like, I want it to be fun, man. I want you to enjoy training. I want you to look forward to this 45 minutes we get to spend together a few times a week, because you get to, it's going to, better you physically, better you mentally. And, it's in a place where you can express yourself. And that's, that's the environment that I'm trying to create or try to create. So.
Yeah. I mean, that's, I think what we were missing a lot of at Springfield too, just when we were lifting, and then I left baseball.
Yeah, we're lifting. We move on to C block, and Brett's still doing his front squat. He's working at 600 pounds, and everyone else is done.
They ain't give me warm up sets. I never did, dude. Looking back, like I was like those strength coaches were all GAs. Like I was such a dick. I was such a dick to them. I was just, no, like I know I need a certain thing, but I was like VBT percentages. I'm not doing that. I was like, this bar speed unit's broken. I just took it off and put another 45-pound plate on. It's like nothing was wrong with the unit. It was so slow.
Oh, but dude, honestly, like the way you approach that, like your passion for S&C definitely influenced me, man. Like it was easy to tell how much you cared about, the weight room and helping people in there, dude. And those lifts were part of that.
Oh, dude, I appreciate that. It's good that someone got something out of it because my baseball career did not get anything out of that. I was definitely the weight room hero. We were just talking about that in like a couple episodes ago. I was just like, that's just such the pipeline for athlete into strength coach is once you care about training that much, you're like, all right, the sport's going to be done soon.
In the sport with a skill and training becomes a skill, then probably.
Yeah, it's just all training all the time. That's all I care about. Thanks for tuning in.
And if you enjoyed it, please leave a 5-star rating and review and share the show, because the only way that this show grows is if you like it, share it, and tell your friends and family about it.
New episode every Monday.